the current UFC champions versus the greatest fighters of all time in their weight classes. Starting with the heavyweight division. Jon Jones versus Stipe Miocic, who is regarded as the greatest heavyweight of all time, undisputed at this point for the UFC. Now we saw them two fight. Stipe was not in his prime, he was not the same fighter. We're looking at the Stipe that beat Junior Dos Santos, Alistair Overeem, Francis Ngannou the first time, Daniel Cormier, that version of Stipe. I think would be a much more difficult fight for Jon Jones. He has the boxing skill, the best boxer with knockout potential that Jones has ever fought in his career. He has good punching speed, moves and angles very well, great footwork for the division. Even though he wasn't super elusive moving around the cage, he was very good at taking angles to land his shots. That's the sort of stuff that you need to get past the long reach of Jon Jones. And there were moments in their fight that they had where Stipe was able to land punches using his slower movement. I think a prime Stipe would have landed those punches a lot more devastatingly and more consistently. He also had solid takedown defense, not to the level to completely stuff every takedown from Jon Jones, but he would stuff a lot of them. And also Jones in the heavyweight division was not in his prime. He was better at light heavyweight, but I do think the fight would be very, very close. I think the wrestling would still win Jones the fight overall. I think he eventually win by a late submission or decision. 55% chance, Jones wins, 45% chance, Stipe wins. Very, very close fight. Jon Jones versus Fedor Emelianenko. Fedor was at his best a long time ago, fighting guys like Mirko Cro Cop and Big Nog, Mark Coleman, Kevin Randleman, a much older generation of the heavyweight division, which even compared to now isn't that far apart in skills and abilities. But I do think stylistically, Fedor would have been a very tough fight for Jon Jones. He's a fighter that would not be taken to the ground easily. Jones' methods of getting takedowns against shorter fighters is from the clinch by trips and throws and stuff like that. Exactly what you saw in the Daniel Cormier fight, who is very similar in shape and size to Fedor. But Fedor excelled in that area. He was an expert in the clinch. High-level judo, high-level sambo, naturally heavier, and just as strong, if not even stronger than Jon Jones. So I don't think Jones would have had a lot of success in the clinch with getting the fight to the ground. Maybe the strikes would be big there, the elbows, the knees and stuff like that. But back in Pride, when Fedor was at his best, fighters weren't really throwing elbows. They weren't really using the cage and stuff like that, so that would be an advantage for Jon Jones, as the fight would take place in the UFC rule set. But Fedor had the punching power, he was faster, he had an iron chin. The oblique kicks and side kicks to the knee would be a big thing for Jones, but not when the fighter is constantly moving forward, throwing hooks and haymakers and those Russian hooks, hitting with the index knuckle, rotating the fist inward. Very hard punch to defend, and Fedor was always getting his head off the center line. He can get hit by high kicks and stuff like that, but I'm gonna go with Fedor in this one. In the heavyweight division especially, I think Fedor beats Jon Jones by a late TKO. He also had good cardio, especially for the fighting style that he had. I think Fedor is a very hard stylistic matchup for Jon Jones, especially the heavyweight version of Jones. And then we go to Francis Ngannou. Now this is the fighter that Jones didn't fight, one of the biggest fights ever that didn't happen, but Ngannou has the power. He has about the same reach. He's athletic, he's bigger, he's stronger. The version of Ngannou that fought Stipe also showed great takedown defense. He showed it before against Curtis Blaydes as well, another respectable big wrestler. He's got the leg kicks, Jones doesn't really check kicks, he uses his reach to get away, and that's not going to be a thing in this fight because Ngannou has practically the same reach. So wherever Jones is trying to defend himself by reaching forward, Ngannou can always punch him. I've said it for years, this is the worst matchup for Jon Jones ever in the UFC. I'm going Francis Ngannou by knockout. Ngannou was a nightmare for Jones. And then we go to Jon Jones versus Fabricio Verdum. Now Fabricio Verdum is like the opposite of Francis Ngannou. Elite level grappler, insane submission skills, not great stand-up, but decent boxing fundamentals to throw punches forward. That was the main reason he was able to win against Cain Velasquez, just throwing jabs and straights constantly. And Cain just didn't have the head movement to get away from those punches. The knees were also landing and stuff like that, but that's not going to be an issue for Jones. Jones is not going to take him to the ground. He's going to stand up with him and just beat him up. He's faster, he kicks harder, he's more athletic, he's got the reach advantage. Verdum wasn't a power puncher and he cannot take Jones to the ground, so horrible matchup for Verdum. So I'm going to go with Jon Jones by a third round TKO. And number 5, let's put in Cain Velasquez. A lot of people are interested in this fight. He's like a better version of Daniel Cormier in many ways. They don't fight exactly the same, but there's a lot of resemblance in the way that they fight. They were main training partners for a long time. Cain was a bigger, stronger, more powerful, faster, more athletic version of Daniel Cormier. Very good wrestler, not as good as DC, but solid there, with also better striking than DC. I think it will still be a very difficult fight for both fighters, as Cain didn't have the best head movement, although he would move his head. That alone is good to get past that long reach. He would be constantly pressuring forward, constantly walking down Jones on the fence and landing big shots on him, leg kicks, which again, Jones doesn't really check, punching combinations, very swift, mixing the striking. Jones wouldn't get the takedown easily. In fact, even Brock Lesnar had a hard time wrestling with Cain Velasquez. I know Brock gets clowned on a lot, but Brock was a very, very good wrestler, even in MMA. He was much bigger and stronger and more athletic than Jon Jones, and he had a hard time wrestling with Velasquez. So Jones could get a takedown, not consistently. I think Cain can also get a takedown. Not consistently either, because Jones was very good at defending takedowns himself, but I'm gonna go with Cain Velasquez in this fight. A lot of the stuff that worked for Daniel Cormier, I think suits Cain's style even better, with all the attribute advantages that he has above Daniel Cormier. So I would go with Cain Velasquez by a decision. Very close fight, very competitive. And then we go to Tom Aspinall. So Tom versus Stipe. Both fighters are good boxing. Both fighters are fast for the weight class, although differently. Speed is not all the same with the way the fighters use it. Tom is fast with everything he does. He moves fast, he punches fast, he shoots fast takedowns, his head movement is fast, his reflexes are fast, everything is just at 1 or 2 tempos. Stipe's speed is very different because he's stationary, but he has quick bursts of speed that's hard to time for his opponents. He'll be standing right in front of you, looks like he's moving very slow, but as soon as he starts moving his head from punches, as soon as he pivots and tries to land his own shots, that's when he's moving quick. That's those short bursts of speed that gets very hard to time. He has multiple layers of tempo that he uses both for his offense and his defense. He's also a more technical boxer than Tom Aspinall as well. Tom is able to blitz opponents down before they're able to react. This was shown against Sergey Pavlovich, this was shown against Curtis Blades, and throughout his entire career. Stipe has the boxing skill, best technical boxer in heavyweight history. He also has the experience, and he also has very good eyes to see those shots better than anyone else. He also has good wrestling, able to defend many of DC's takedowns, which I don't think Tom Aspinall stacks up to DC in wrestling. It'd be hard to get under punches and get takedowns because Stipe doesn't usually lose position when he's throwing shots and overextend, so takedowns are there. And Tom does leave his chin up, so I'm gonna go with Stipe Miocic in this fight, winning by a 4th or 5th round TKO, somewhere in the late rounds. Would be a very close fight up until then, but I think the amount of damage that Stipe is able to inflict with his shot placements would be overall just too overwhelming for Tom Aspinall. Then we go to Tom versus Fedor Emelianenko. Tom is not getting a takedown, even though he's the bigger and, crazy enough, faster fighter. Fedor was so fast for a heavyweight, but Tom is even faster than him. That would throw Fedor off guard, because Fedor, just like Tom, fights at 1 or 2 tempos. It's easier to time Fedor than it is against Stipe, for an example. And you know what Fedor is going to do. You know the kind of punches he's going to throw. You know the aggression he's going to come out there with. And I think with that formulated style, Tom would be able to time a lot of his shots defensively, get away using his footwork, and line up his own punches down the center. Straight punches being looping punches, cracking Fedor but not knocking him out instantly. Fedor had a very, very good chin, but I think eventually the speed, the size, and the timing of Tom would eventually win that fight. And then Francis Ngannou. This is an interesting one. Obviously, Tom has the speed advantage, and obviously Francis Ngannou has the power advantage. This is like the two most clear advantages these two have against each other. But the thing is, both fighters have a great chin, but it doesn't matter as much when you're fighting Ngannou. I think if Ngannou lands a big shot on Tom, the fight is over. And Tom leaves his chin up. Francis most likely will defend the takedowns. He had very good takedown defense against Stipe. Tom could time the takedowns under the punches of Francis, who will sometimes get off balance throwing his own shots. But is he strong enough to hold him down in those first few seconds when the fight gets to the ground? Because Ngannou's going to be springing right back up to his feet from there. I don't think so. I think Tom gets a takedown, but I don't think he's strong enough to hold down Ngannou. He should avoid the striking as much as he can though. Maybe land a few shots and resort more to his grappling to win. But I think eventually, patient Francis Ngannou would eventually land that shot on Tom Aspinall and knock him out. Even when you look back at the first Curtis Blades fight with Tom, a lot of those punches were not landing, but they were getting very, very close. And those are the exact same shots that Ngannou can also throw and land with greater reach to Curtis Blades. Tom was able to get his head just away from the punches, but it wouldn't be enough against Ngannou. Now it's a different fighter with a different reach, so Tom would approach it differently. But the thing is, his head movement has always been that way. Even against Sergey Pavlovich, who has practically the same reach as Ngannou, he likes to lean his head away from the punches, shoulder rolling with his chin up in the air. Francis Ngannou has a very underrated double jab which checks head movement a lot of times. When a fighter is frantically or drastically moving their head, the double jab is almost always the answer to it, because the first jab gets the initial reaction. The next jab gets the reaction of them thinking that a right hand's gonna come, which is the usual combo in MMA. Left, right, but when you double up on your jab, it opens up that head movement for the power punch to land. So that would be a big weapon for Francis Ngannou. I think eventually he would land that shot and knock out Tom Aspinall. So I'll go with Ngannou by a mid-round TKO. Then Tom Aspinall versus Fabricio Verdum. I don't think Verdum's grappling would beat Aspinall. I don't think his striking is enough. I think he's slower, he's weaker. He couldn't get the fight to the ground. This is a horrible matchup for him. Definitely have to go with Tom Aspinall by an early knockout, maybe first or second round. And then Tom Aspinall versus Cain Velasquez. This is an interesting fight. I think Tom's more technical, but Cain does have the pressure. The thing that does change the fight compared to other Cain's opponents is the fact that Tom has better footwork than all of those guys. Even JDS. JDS moves a lot, but he's way more ineffective on the back foot. JDS is a monster moving forward, not so much moving backwards. Tom, he's good everywhere. He's dangerous on the back foot. He's dangerous moving forward. He has much more complicated footwork compared to JDS, who kind of moves in one direction, one angle. Tom L steps to get away from angles or to get into angles, switches up the direction he moves and all that stuff. I think it would be a lot more difficult than anybody else Kane has fought before to cut off the cage. Tom is the faster fighter, which is very rare for Kane to fight against. And Kane didn't have the best chin, especially for heavyweight. He doesn't have the same chin that Tom Aspinall has, right? Tom took a big shot from Sergey Pavlovich. Kane has never taken a big shot from anyone that hits like that. Every time he's gotten hit by a big shot like that, he's been rocked or knocked out. So I do think Tom Aspinall will have the advantage in this fight and eventually knock out Cain Velasquez somewhere in the mid rounds. But this will be a close one. This would be a very competitive fight. And then we go to light heavyweight. Alex Pereira is the current champion. And how would he fight against Jon Jones? The best version of Jon Jones. So obviously Alex has a striking advantage. Jones has the wrestling advantage. So much of a wrestling advantage that I don't think Alex can stop it. I think he gets taken down right from the beginning of the fight and submitted. His wrestling has gotten better, but he was the same guy who got taken down by Israel Adesanya, Jan Blachowicz, Yuri Prohaska. It would take him many years to get to the level to stop a Jon Jones takedown. If he could defend the takedown, he would win this fight handily. If he can't, which he most likely would not be able to from the very first takedown shot, he loses the fight very easily. This is an easy win for Jon Jones. And then we go to Daniel Cormier, who again had high-level wrestling, and arguably an even worse matchup for Alex Pereira because DC had a better consistent shot of a takedown than Jon Jones, who would like to get into the clinch and take fighters down from there. DC will shoot on a single leg, and there's nothing Alex could do about it. Jump on his back, rear naked choke, easy win for Daniel Cormier. Very similar reason to why he would lose to Jon Jones, but even worse because DC is just a more consistent wrestler. Then we go to Alexander Gustafsson, who I believe is the third greatest of all time. It's just he fought in an era where DC and Jon Jones were the best, so he didn't get the belt. If they weren't there, he'd be a champion as well, just like all the others, but he's part of that timeline. Any other all-time great light heavyweights that are in that timeline, they're not getting the belt either. This would be an interesting fight because both fighters are strikers by trade. Alex is a kickboxer, Gustafsson is a boxer. I think in the striking, he would deal well with Alex compared to Jones and DC. He's got the reach, he's got the height, he's got the boxing prowess, he's got the footwork, very good combinations, good counter shots, good aggressive volume. But the leg kicks would be a big weapon for Alex Pereira. And I think that would be the main technique that would start to cripple Gustafsson throughout the fight. And then Gus would use his wrestling. He is one of the best wrestlers in light heavyweight history. He's the most underrated wrestler. He's the same guy who was able to wrestle with Daniel Cormier and Jon Jones. He's on that level. And with him being on that level, there's nothing Alex is going to do to stop that takedown. He's the same guy that put Jan Blachowicz to a wrestling clinic and beat him by decision. He's not a submission guy, he's not a ground and pound guy, but his wrestling would be enough to win the fight by decision over 5 rounds. So I'll go with Alexander Gustafsson by decision. Not a great matchup for Alex Pereira. Anyone who could really wrestle on that high level is going to have a major advantage against Alex. Then Rumble Johnson. Anthony Rumble Johnson would be a very interesting fight and one of the 4 kings of the light heavyweight division that I think Alex can actually beat just because of the style that Rumble had. Rumble was more of a striker than any of those guys. He refused to go to the wrestling consistently, right? We don't look at the Daniel Cormier rematch. Consistently, he doesn't care to use his wrestling as much, even though he has a wrestling background. So he could go there and try to win that way, but I do think he will strike with Alex Pereira until it gets too difficult for him, and then he'll start to wrestle. But the explosive style that he had, a great amount of speed, which would be an advantage for him, but so wild and explosive and bursts that I think Alex would time him and potentially land a left hook, eventually put together body shots. The leg kick would also be effective, but Rumble stood in a way where it could be very easy from the check kicks, knowing that Alex Pereira has that powerful calf kick. Rumble's stance is very wide. He's almost like squared in front of his opponent. Makes it easy to just turn his leg and check kicks from that stance, taking away a lot of kicking options for Alex Pereira, but I still think he would throw calf kicks and land some of them. But I do think eventually Rumble will decide to wrestle, and the fight completely changes from there. He would get Alex to the ground and destroy him with ground and pound. Where Alexander Gustafsson didn't really have that powerful, dangerous ground and pound, Rumble did. Rumble needed to land a few shots when he's on top, and that fight is over, just like he did against Ryan Bader. Even though he didn't shoot the takedown, Bader tried to get him to the ground. Rumble defended it and destroyed him. So I would go with Rumble Johnson by a mid-round TKO. And then Chuck Liddell, the legend. Fought a long time ago though. He had the striking, he had a good reach, the famous overhand, which could always land on anybody he fights, other than maybe Daniel Cormier because he's so short. Fighting a 6'4" fighter who keeps his head up tall and uses that reach to get away from punches. Chuck Liddell having almost the same reach, right? It says 76, but I think he said he had a 79-inch reach. He would confuse the people measuring his arm by bending his arms inward, which would make it look like his arms are shorter than they were. With a 79-inch reach, he could land that overhand, but that's all he has. He had no defense. Chuck Liddell's defense was relied on his chin. He really wasn't able to get away from punches, even from fighters like Randy Couture, who was a good fighter at the time, but comparing his striking to Alex's, it's not even close. Chuck Liddell's getting hit by Keith Jardine, Vanderlei Silva, and a bunch of different fighters who were so much more wild and didn't have the same attributes or skill as Alex. Alex knocks him out eventually. Eventually, I think Chuck Liddell would crumble to Alex's shots. Just like Khalil Roundtree, I think Chuck would take a lot of damage, but he eventually would get TKO'd. Khalil had much better defense than Chuck Liddell, and I say he'd win by knockout, maybe in like the second round. I think the leg kicks would just cause so much damage and slow down the movement of Chuck, make the punches up top land even easier, and eventually Alex would just KO him. But then at middleweight, the champion is Dricus Du Plessis. How would he fight Anderson Silva? This is a fight that a lot of fans have been thinking about for a while, especially leading up to the Israel Adesanya fight, who has a lot of resemblance to the way that Anderson fought. But Anderson was a masterful counterpuncher. He had the best timing. There's no one who had better timing with their strikes than Anderson Silva. And Dricus' style of barraging forward with these blitzes was perfect for someone like Anderson Silva to counter, in ways that Adesanya didn't even try. Anderson would do it every single time unless he's clowning around, and that's the one thing that would go against Anderson. If he was overconfident, taunting and dancing around in the octagon, I think Dricus would eventually beat him. But I think stylistically, this is maybe the worst fight for Dricus in middleweight history. Not only that, Anderson was dangerous off his back if he got taken to the ground. Dricus doesn't have the cleanest takedowns. He's very big and strong. That's how he most likely would get the fight to the ground. Like, he's not as technical as a prime Chris Weidman. He's much clumsier with his technique, but he's very strong. So I think eventually he would get the fight to the ground if he doesn't get knocked out immediately. But we've seen Dricus get in very bad positions on the ground before. So I can see Anderson getting a triangle choke, an arm bar, maybe just pushing him off in moments and standing up. The grappling would make the fight a lot more competitive, but in the striking, Anderson washes Dricus stylistically. So I do think Anderson would eventually knock out Dricus somewhere in the mid-rounds. We've seen Dricus fight Adesanya. We saw him fight Robert Whittaker. Those are the two next greatest middleweights of all time. But then what about Chris Weidman in his prime? Prime Chris Weidman was a very well-rounded fighter. He had excellent technique in his wrestling, good fundamental boxing, very well-timed elbows like he landed on Mark Munoz. So if Dricus blitzed in, the short-range over elbow could land on Dricus. He had a long reach, a very good jab, doubled up on his punches, which is the way that he knocked out Anderson Silva. Not going to work as much against Dricus, who likes to cover up more than moving his head. But if he ever covered up, that invites the takedown from Weidman. Because when you're covering up, your hands are not ready to stuff a takedown with underhooks or even a whizzer. And Weidman's wrestling style was very good with that blast double leg, with a very good single leg. Those bursting takedowns are very quick. There wouldn't be a lot of time for Dricus to get from covering up his head to underhooking whizzer and getting away from the takedown. It'd be way too quick. Weidman was also very good on the ground. The thing that would make the fight a lot more difficult for Weidman, again, is just the unconventional, crazy style of Dricus with knockout power and all that stuff. Weidman also didn't have the best chin. It was decent. I don't think it was enough to take a big shot from Dricus, right? He eventually get rocked from the shot that maybe TKO'd or something. But I would think that Weidman would win the fight consistently. Like, he would win rounds, he would win most of the exchanges, but then at some moment in the fight, Dricus lands some big shot, and we know Weidman's fights go like that a lot of times. Either Weidman makes a mistake in the stand-up, Dricus lands some big counter shot, drops him, finishes him on the ground after Weidman was winning the fight. That's how I could kind of see the fight going, but it's almost a 50-50 fight, but I would say Dricus would win most likely, but slightly. And then Gegard Mousasi. This is an interesting fight. Gegard in his prime had an amazing jab, very good striking, good grappling. He was well-rounded, but didn't mix it together as well as some of the other fighters like Weidman and Rockhold, Jacare, etc. But he had excellent striking fundamentals that wouldn't allow Dricus to land some of his wild strikes. He had good takedown defense, he was big for the weight class, used to fight a heavyweight, used to fight a light heavyweight, but the style that was very difficult for him sometimes was a fighter with good movement, like Lyoto and Uriah Hall. Dricus doesn't really have that. Dricus is more of a stationary fighter, walks you down. That's the sort of style that Gegard liked to fight against because they're right there for the jab. You constantly just throwing the jab at them, lining up the straight, throwing up uppercuts, and just had solid striking defense. I think Gegard would have beaten Dricus Du Plessis. I think his defense and his composure would be his main advantages in that fight. Dricus would not be able to bewilder him at any point of that fight. And it's a reason why the Strickland fight was so difficult for Dricus, because he couldn't really get him off balance or fluster him or anything like that, get him in chaotic exchanges. Gegard is kind of like Strickland in that way, where you cannot get him away from the way that he fights. He has a very similar style to Strickland, reliant on the jab, has very good defense, excellent fundamentals, except he had more punching power, and he will counter the other fighter if they get way too aggressive, which Strickland didn't do against Dricus. So I would go with Gegard Mousasi to win that fight by decision. And then at welterweight with Belal Muhammad. How does Belal fight GSP? This is an interesting fight because Belal has the cardio, he has the wrestling, he's very physically strong, he has decent volume boxing, but GSP, I believe, was a superior striker. I think he was better overall. He has the reach advantage, he has the best jab ever in MMA, and Belal will walk in straight lines sometimes. The jab would just be a perfect counter to that, causing Belal to have to move out on angle angles, which opens up takedowns for GSP. The jab and the double leg, this is the same exact combo that he's beating everybody with. And I don't think that's much different against Belal. He has excellent distance management shown throughout his entire career. And the fact that they're both in the same stance, it makes it much more difficult for Belal to stop that jab. The reason why like Johnny Hendricks was able to get on the inside a lot better was because he was a southpaw. The jab is a lot more ineffective against southpaws just naturally. And even against Nick Diaz, it was more difficult to land that jab on him than it was against Jake Shields or Dan Hardy or Thiago Alves and many other fighters. So I do think GSP would be a difficult fight for Belal Muhammad, and I think he would win by decision. But then Kamaru Usman, prime Kamaru Usman would have been very interesting. Volume punches, good wrestling, a lot of pressure, a lot of volume, just constant pressure, mix up striking and wrestling. But Kamaru had a lot of punching power, he had very good wrestling, he had a good chin, a strong jab shown in the Gilbert Burns fight, good 1-2 shown in the Jorge Masvidal fight, so he can always land that big shot on Belal. But Belal's physically strong. I think he would get some takedowns on Kamaru, not be able to keep him down too much, but I think he would get some takedowns, and it changes the dynamic of that fight. But it's like a 50-50 fight. I can see both fighters winning. I really can't see one fighter winning more than the other. I would say it's a 50-50 fight. But then Belal Muhammad versus Matt Hughes. Matt Hughes is a good wrestler offensively, which is not too great. I don't think he takes down Belal that much, maybe a couple times, but his shot placements for takedowns were a lot more obvious than Belal's or Kamaru's or most of these newer wrestlers. But he was very physically strong. I think if there's one area he can match Belal Muhammad is with strength, but that's only offensively because Matt Hughes getting taken down by Sean Shirk. Shirk was very small. Shirk was like 5'6", a blown up lightweight. He took down Matt Hughes multiple times in their fight. Matt Serra took him down, of course GSP as well, but if Sean Shirk is taking you down in your prime, I don't see how Belal Muhammad doesn't. Especially that the wrestling game has evolved in MMA so much, and Belal is bigger and stronger than Sean Shirk. And Belal has better striking than Matt Hughes too. Matt Hughes might have more punching power, but his striking was non-existent compared to today. Like he would get outstruck by every welterweight on the roster, let alone Belal. So I think it's an easy win for Belal Muhammad. He would win by maybe a 4th or 5th round TKO. Matt Hughes did not have a good chin at all. And then Tyron Woodley, this is interesting because Woodley had very good takedown defense. He was very explosive, one-punch knockout power. Stylistically would be a tough fight for Belal, except for the fact that Tyron didn't do well against volume and pressure. Oddly enough, when you just look at him, right, you just see how big and strong the guy is. He's so powerful, he has good wrestling. It's like, how does volume and pressure overwhelm him in a fight like that? It's like that one thing, if you fight a big and strong puncher, sometimes the best way to fight them is to bring the fight to them and push them back. Takes away their power. And I think that's what Belal will do. Even though Woodley would defend some of the takedowns, and he'd be swinging that right hand all day, it's like the only punch he threw, they would understand exactly what Woodley would try to land on him. The right hand and the right low kick, those are the main techniques he threw in the stand-up. He always backs up to the fence in all of his fights, unless it's against Robbie Lawler, who Robbie was the one moving back uncharacteristically. In his prime, Woodley was always backing up, and that just fits Belal's style so well. He would just pressure him to the cage, volume punches, takedown, pick him up and slam him, rinse and repeat, or just keep him on the fence if he can't take him to the ground. That one big shot can always land for Woodley, but I think consistently Belal will have more success winning that fight. So I'll go with Belal Muhammad, not as dominant. I wouldn't say like he absolutely wins the fight. The power is always going to be there for Woodley to win the fight, so I think Belal would win by a decision most likely. Obviously a rematch with Leon, I think Belal would win again. And then in the lightweight division with Islam Makhachev versus Khabib Nurmagomedov. This is a fight a lot of fans like to talk about, right? Who is the best lightweight of all time? Well, Islam of course has a striking advantage, Khabib has the wrestling advantage. Islam is more athletic, Khabib is more durable and better with pressure. Islam has gotten taken down by Thiago Moises and Arman Tsarukyan on short notice. Khabib is a better wrestler than both of those guys in nearly every aspect of wrestling, especially fence wrestling. And Islam likes to move back sometimes. He likes to land his counter punches and move away from shots and stuff, which is a perfect stop for Khabib to pressure to the fence. The kicks wouldn't be there for Islam because Khabib would be constantly moving forward. The counter punches could be there, but every single time Khabib would duck under those and go right to the legs for a takedown. Khabib and Islam have some of the best eyes for fighting, but no one had it like Khabib. Khabib didn't have the skill in the stand-up of Islam, and he was able to defend shots from some of the best strikers in the world off of just pure instinct and reflexes. No one has better eyes than Khabib when it comes to fighting, and I think it would be the same against Islam. Every time Islam throws a punch up high to counter Khabib's aggression, Khabib will be able to duck under those, get the takedown, and start ground and pounding Islam, who doesn't have the best chin. I think a few flurries of ground and pound from Khabib would change the fight drastically, and Islam would not be the same fighter in the next round. So I do think Although it would be a very good fight, I think Khabib would win against Islam. It's just a very tough style for Islam to fight against. But it doesn't seem that way because they train with each other. Islam's a very good grappler, but the difference of pressure between these two changes the fight so much than what the common perception is of it. Islam being willing to move backwards, and Khabib being the best pressure fighter in UFC history, with the best ground and pound in UFC history, with the best fence wrestling in UFC history. And Islam doesn't even compare to him in any of those areas, besides maybe fence wrestling, right? He's not as good with pressure. He's not as good with ground and pound. I don't even think Islam would be able to stop Khabib's onslaught with that combination of skills. So I think Khabib would win maybe somewhere in the mid rounds, like 3rd or 4th round by TKO. Now, Islam fought Charles, he fought Dustin, but what about Benson Henderson? Benson Henderson was a well-rounded fighter who is creative with his techniques. He had good fundamentals in every aspect of MMA. Very underrated fighter. He had decent takedown defense against Frankie, against Prime Clay Guida. He had good takedowns himself. Very strong kicks, a good jab. Just good basic techniques all around, with mixing in some creative techniques like punching the leg and throwing a kick to the head while holding onto the back of the opponent. Crazy stuff like that. But I do think nothing he really presents is a problem for Islam. Anthony Pettis took him down. He's a better wrestler than Frankie. He's a better wrestler than Clay Guida. He's a better wrestler than Gilbert Melendez. All these guys took him down. He's better on the ground by far than any of those guys. He's also a better striker than all of those guys as well. There's not a single fighter that Benson Henderson has fought that beats Islam in any area of MMA, besides maybe RDA in some areas, but that's it. I don't think he stops the takedowns. I think he gets outstruck. Not a dominant performance, but a comfortable win for Islam. I would think he wins like every round to a decision. But what about Islam versus RDA? RDA was a way better fighter at lightweight in his prime than he ever was at welterweight. He had very good striking, he had good wrestling, able to mix up the striking and wrestling well like he did against Anthony Pettis. But they're both going to be southpaws, so the open side kick are not going to be there for each other. They both love that technique. RDA had a very good jab straight combo, a good double leg, but just like we saw against Khabib, RDA is completely outgunned in the grappling. He would not be able to take down Islam either. Islam would reverse him on the fence. He would take RDA down. He'll be able to counterpunch certain techniques that RDA will throw forward because of the wrestling threat. RDA might get more aggressive in the striking, opening him up to counterpunches, which then would start pushing him back to the fence. Islam will get the takedown and ultimately win the fight by a decision. But then at featherweight, Ilia Topuria is the current champion. How would he fight Jose Aldo? This is a very good fight. Aldo in his prime, which a lot of people confuse with when his prime started and ended. Jose Aldo's prime ended with the first Max Holloway fight. That was the last of prime Jose Aldo. Now, Aldo had devastating leg kicks shown in the Uriah Faber fight, the Ricardo Lamas fight, putting together combinations, left hook, right low kick. Some of the best usage of leg kicks we've ever seen in the UFC. And Ilia has that boxing stance, leans heavy on the front leg, not able to check the kicks, but he can move away from those. But I think Aldo is so fast, faster than Josh Emmett, faster than Volkanovski with the leg kicks, that he would be able to land those. That is the main game-changing technique out of Jose Aldo. Those leg kicks. He had the best takedown defense ever in UFC history. Ilia would not be able to take him to the ground. But Ilia has the boxing skills. He's the best boxer in UFC history. Aldo, although technically he should be able to handle that, but the thing that always hurt Aldo throughout his career was that he would attack in certain ways that he shouldn't, and it would get him knocked out, like against Conor. The last thing he should have done was rush forward. He should have been throwing leg kicks at him, but then again, that's what the mental warfare of fighting is all about. He got too chaotic in moments whenever he landed a big shot. This is shown against Max Holloway and Chad Mendes, and especially the more heated the fight was, the more Jose Aldo would explode, and Ilia could counter a lot of that. He could time Aldo exploding in those moments. If he rushed in with a combination, got Aldo to react. From that reaction, Ilia would be able to counter him. But I do think it's a very difficult fight stylistically for Ilia Topuria. Again, mainly because of those leg kicks. And if Aldo's fighting patient, I think the fight is more favored for him to win. I think stylistically, this is the hardest fight in Ilia's entire career. A patient, prime Jose Aldo, throwing leg kicks. So again, on paper, he should win like that. But there are some fights that Aldo just wasn't throwing leg kicks like that when he should have. And that's the kind of thing about Aldo. He has all the skills to be the best in the world, but he would attack in certain ways or not attack in certain ways that would cause him to lose the fight. But I would slightly go Jose Aldo by a decision. Now, Ilia defeated Volkanovski and Holloway. What about him fighting Conor McGregor? This is another tough fight. I mean, the featherweight division has the best strikers overall in UFC history. I mean, you look at Aldo, Holloway, Volkanovski, Ilia, McGregor, like insane levels of talent. And the thing about Conor at featherweight was he wasn't the same guy at lightweight. He was a lot more bouncy with his footwork, elusive, throwing out more kicks, a lot more catered to that karate style than the more emphasized boxing style at lightweight. And I do think the way he fights here is better against Ilia than if he had that grounded boxing style. He wouldn't be there for the shots as much. He has the reach advantage, he's taller, he's fast, very good footwork, he has the high kick, he has the roundhouse kicks to the head and the spinning kicks as well to line up the opponent down the center for the left hand, which he was doing against everybody, especially against Dennis Siver. That was probably the best display of kicks that he's ever had in his career. The long straight left can be slipped and countered by Ilia. That's a big thing for him, but I think the biggest advantage for for Ilia in that fight is the grappling. Get the takedown and try to submit Conor McGregor. I think stylistically, the striking favors Conor even more than it does Jose Aldo, but the fact that Ilia has the grappling to go to makes it not as tough as the Jose Aldo fight, because he cannot take down Aldo. And if he did, he could not keep him down at all. He could take down Conor and could even submit him. So I would slightly go with Ilia Topuria because of that. It's such a big advantage for him. Featherweight Conor, who was focused, hungry, had footwork, had the kicks with high-level boxing, that guy could beat Ilia Topuria. But some of the all-time greats, Uriah Faber. Uriah had good punching power, he had a very good guillotine, solid wrestler, but very stationary. I don't think he beats Ilia. I think Ilia would knock him out. He's better everywhere than Uriah Faber, except maybe just wrestling and speed. Ilia was a better striker, the better grappler, better footwork, more powerful, more durable. Very tough fight for Uriah Faber. But then at bantamweight, the current champion is Merab Dvalishvili, who has solid wrestling, supreme cardio, very tough fighter with insane volume, with both his striking and his wrestling. Now, he's not technically the best in any area. Even his wrestling is not super technical, but it's so overwhelming and relentless that he just keeps spamming takedowns on his opponent until they gas out and they can't keep up with him. Well, how does that deal with Dominic Cruz, the greatest bantamweight of all time? Stylistically, Dominic Cruz is the worst matchup for Merab other than maybe Umar in bantamweight history, because Merab doesn't have powerful kicks. He's not a power puncher. He can't stop the movement that much. He can't knock him out with one shot, and you need those to beat Dominic Cruz. You need it. If Merab does not have the leg kicks to stop his movement, he's gonna lose the fight. Merab will move in straight lines a lot of times. He sometimes goes laterally, but he likes to attack linearly. Perfect for Dominic Cruz. Cruz had insane footwork, high fight IQ, very well-rounded. His striking was ugly to watch. It was like a lot of haymakers and crazy stuff like that, but if you can't punch him, if you can't cut off the footwork, if you can't leg kick him, those punches are going to land consistently, especially because Merab is so aggressive. He'll be trying to land punches, he'd be trying to land certain stuff. They're all missing. The counter haymakers from Cruz are going to land, and he's fought faster fighters than Merab, like Demetrius Johnson and Joseph Benavidez. He fought fighters who also had great wrestling, like TJ Dillashaw and Uriah Faber. Cruz also had amazing wrestling for MMA. He's one of the best scramblers we've ever seen. In his prime, it was so hard for fighters to keep him down. He'd be rolling, he'd be hitting the switch, attacking the single leg to get up. Crazy stuff that Merab doesn't fight against. The only guy that was capable of that he fought was Henry Cejudo, but Cejudo's not at his best. Coming off a long hiatus, much older. This is a prime Dominic Cruz we're talking about. We've seen all those techniques from him when he fought a prime Uriah Faber the second time. And even out of his prime, when he fought TJ, he was still able to outmaneuver TJ Dillashaw to win that fight. I think if Merab shot in takedowns, Cruz would be able to reverse and scramble his way back up to the feet and use footwork to get away from Merab's follow-up shots. This is something a lot of fighters aren't able to do against Merab, except Sean O'Malley in the third round of their fight. But the reason why O'Malley was getting taken down by some of the follow-up shots was because he was trying to punch back after defending the takedown. Cruz wouldn't do that. He'd be using his footwork to get away from the fence first before lining up his shots, knowing that his opponent is a volume wrestler. So I do think Dominic Cruz would win this fight. He is a horrible stylistic matchup for Merab, and he'd win by a decision. But then what about Aljamain Sterling? This is another very difficult fight for Merab because Aljamain can wrestle. He's much more dangerous on the ground. He had volume striking with a long reach. I think he's physically stronger than Merab, and whenever the fight goes to the ground, Merab is always in danger of getting submitted. He has been submitted before when he fought Ricky Simon. And when Merab takes his opponent to the ground, he doesn't finish him with ground and pound. He doesn't try to get a submission usually. He's there to keep you down and control you for as long as he can until you get back up to your feet, and then he takes you down again. Aljamain would want to stay on the ground and go for those submissions, try to reverse them, being the more dangerous fighter, and ultimately winning that fight by a decision. So I'll go with Aljamain Sterling to beat Merab Dvalishvili. But then what about TJ Dillashaw? TJ was very well rounded. He had insanely good striking skills. He had very good wrestling, but he did get taken down a few times by Dominic Cruz. It's a different style of wrestling to Merab, but I do think Merab would be able to take him down. The thing is though, can he rack up enough damage to defeat TJ? Because the takedowns themselves are not going to win him this fight. TJ's footwork is going to allow him to land strikes before he gets taken down. A fighter who's more stationary, like maybe a Jose Aldo, wouldn't have the opportunity to land those certain shots compared to fighters who move around a lot like TJ Dillashaw and Sean O'Malley. But that's the thing. O'Malley has very good footwork. He's very long, he's very fast and athletic, and he couldn't get past that. Now, O'Malley's not the wrestler that TJ is. Not even close. So I do think a fight between Merab and TJ is 50-50. I think both fighters can win that fight. Merab will get the takedowns, but might not do much with those. TJ would land some shots, but would he inflict enough damage to win the fight? Both fighters neutralize a lot of their offense, so I see it as a 50-50. Now, he already fought Peter Yan. What about Renan Barão? Renan Barão had such insane takedown defense from all the damage from TJ Dillashaw. TJ Dillashaw, a very good wrestler, could not get a takedown. Not a single one. He shot 3 times in that first fight, while Renan Barão was concussed from the damage earlier in the fight and couldn't get a single takedown. The first takedown was very close, you can count that or not. The official stat guys didn't, and even in the second fight where Barão was not the same fighter anymore, the brain damage settled in from their first fight. TJ shot 5 takedowns and couldn't get a single one. Again, Barão taking an absurd amount of damage. After all the brain damage he's already had from the first fight, he took even more brain damage in the second fight, and TJ still couldn't get a single takedown on him. Uriah Faber couldn't take him down in 2 different fights, shot 8 takedowns total, could not even get one of those. Renan Barão in his prime was a very good striker, extremely technical, very good timing on his shots, had good kicks, had a good overhand right, had a very good jab, stationary with his footwork, so he'll be there for Merab. But kind of like with a Jose Aldo fight, I don't think Merab takes him down. But it'd be a 5-round fight. And we didn't see Barão defending takedowns on the fence that much. There's one I remember from Uriah Faber, and he fought Faber off of the clinch and got away from the fence. But the thing is, Barão didn't get pressured that much unless he got rocked first, like the way TJ dropped him, right? So it was harder to pressure Barão than it was Jose Aldo. So it just depends, can Barão inflict enough damage before getting held on the fence by Merab to win the fight? I think he could for 5 rounds. A prime Renan Barão, because an over-the-hill Jose Aldo didn't really take that much damage in their fight. He was just on the fence the entire fight. Prime Aldo would have most likely been different. I think the same with Renan Barão as well, even though he was harder to pressure back than Jose Aldo. So I go with Renan Barão very slightly to beat Merab Dvalishvili. I just realized the greatest bantamweights ever, besides Peter Yan, are all very bad matchups for Merab, because all of these guys are very good wrestlers, or they have insane takedown defense. But we go to the flyweight division. The current champion is Alexandre Pantoja, who is very dominant. He has some of the best Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu in the UFC. He has good punching power. He's very tough. One of the most durable fighters we've ever seen. A chin made out of granite. Impossible to knock him out, and his striking is only getting better. Decent Muay Thai skills, good leg kicks, powerful lunging hooks. Maybe the best scrambler we've ever seen in the UFC. He gets your back. He is dominating the fight from there. Well, the greatest of all time is Demetrius Johnson, who Pantoja called out. He would love to fight the greatest of all time, but DJ is extremely well-rounded. He's good at everything. Excellent wrestling, excellent jiu-jitsu, very good boxing, very good Muay Thai, and mixes all of the martial arts together better than almost anybody we've ever seen. Extremely high fight IQ, insanely fast, and is also tough and has a lot of heart. When he fought John Dodson, most fighters would have been done after those first 2 rounds. John Dodson dropped DJ like a total of 3 or 4 times in the first 2 rounds. DJ still came back to win the fight later, so even if Pantoja dropped him with some big shot, DJ is not out of the fight until it's done, right? You have to KO him or submit him. Well, that's the thing now. So DJ's small. He may be about 10 pounds lighter than Alexandre Pantoja, which is a lot. He's not as good at jiu-jitsu. He most likely does not want to go to the ground with him. DJ almost got submitted by Tim Elliott in the first round, who is multiple levels below Pantoja in jiu-jitsu. Pantoja hits harder. Any exchange, he can hurt DJ. DJ would have to get in and out constantly. Get in, throw the jab straight or jab overhand, get out without getting hit himself or taken down. And we know that Pantoja is always closing the distance. The space that DJ has to work with is always going to be limited fighting Pantoja, and that's a huge hindrance to his game because DJ needs space to be effective. He needs to move around. He needs to be able to create angles and move in and out and all this sort of stuff. That's when he does his best work. He wouldn't have that against Pantoja. Pantoja will always be marching down, no matter what is thrown at him, because he could take anything DJ throws at him and walk right through it, land his own punch from there, or take him down. It's a very tough fight for DJ, but I do think it's competitive. I would say Pantoja would win by decision, maybe like a 55% chance. But what about Pantoja versus, well, he already beat Brandon Moreno. What about him fighting Deiveson Figueiredo the second time? Because both fighters got better since their first fight. Davidson's pound for pound, the hardest puncher in UFC history. It's absolutely absurd how hard this guy hits. He's the only fighter to drop Pantoja in a fight. He's hard to pressure back himself. That was shown in their first fight. Pantoja was marching forward, but the power is able to keep him off a lot. He's the only guy that has the power to keep Pantoja off of him. He's also good on the ground. Pantoja would probably get some takedowns just like he did in the first fight. Davidson's a good scrambler. He's able to get back up to his feet. But I think this version of Pantoja might be able to submit Figueiredo. We see him get submitted by Brandon Moreno. He was taken down by those double underhooks into the trip multiple times from Moreno. So I would go with Alexandre Pantoja. He's smarter from the first fight. He would know not to run into shots the same way. He would be able to get the takedowns from the clinch and ultimately submit Figueiredo, maybe in the 4th or 5th rounds. But what about Joseph Benavidez? Benavidez had good grappling, had good knockout power, but not that fast for the weight class. I think Pantoja's faster, he's bigger too, but Benavidez threw his hook short, so he would be able to fight on the inside with Pantoja, able to generate a lot of power in those short hooks, but I think he also gets taken down and submitted. Pantoja would walk through a lot of those punches, even though Benavidez has good punching power. So I'll go with Pantoja, submission also in the later rounds. And finally, Henry Cejudo. This is a very different fight, because Cejudo's not getting taken down by Pantoja. That's a very bad stylistic fight for Alexandre Pantoja. He's gonna have to strike with Henry Cejudo, Cejudo's a better striker. He's fast, he's powerful, he's very good at hitting fighters on the center line, and that's how Pantoja fights. He walks in the center line, tries a pressure. Perfect target for Cejudo to constantly practice against with that right straight, just how he did against Wilson Hayes. Still to this day, the perfect right straight in the UFC. And I think that will cause Pantoja to have to change up his footwork, change up his style, and I don't think it would go too well for Pantoja against Cejudo. So I think Cejudo wins that fight. I think he's the one flyweight that would be confident in beating Alexandre Pantoja. Styles make fights, man. You got the wrestling of Cejudo, you got the punching power. He's heavier than Pantoja. The punch is going to feel a bit different than maybe taking shots from DJ. I would say he would win by decision. Pantoja would get dropped in the fight, but I don't think he would get knocked out. But I think it would be somewhat dominant for Henry Cejudo. And then we'll speed run the female divisions. The current champion is Juliana Pena versus Amanda Nunes. We saw that already. Juliana versus Ronda Rousey. I think it's actually a good fight, but Ronda would win. Juliana's got some striking, but it's still horrid. Not good enough to rely on that to beat Ronda. She's a wrestler too. She'll shoot and takedowns. Ronda will flip her on her head and submit her. You can't wrestle with Ronda. You can't. That's the way to lose the fight. But the women bantamweights don't have that sort of fight IQ. I mean, how many fighters shot in takedowns when they knew that's not how you beat Ronda? All of them still tried though. I remember when Kat Zingano literally ran headfirst at her. Last way to fight Ronda is to do that. After all the fighters, she flipped on their head and armbarred them, and same thing happened to her. Juliana versus Miesha Tate. I think it's competitive. I think it would be like a 50-50 fight. Both can wrestle well. Both are scrappy. Both are tough. Not great strikers, but decent grapplers. Juliana versus Holly Holm. Maybe Juliana wins. She takes her down, ground and pound, submits her, something like that. Valentina Shevchenko. We saw that fight. Raquel Pennington. We saw that fight. Raquel wins. The female flyweights. The current champion is Valentina Shevchenko, who is also the greatest of all time, and she fought everyone else who's like second, third, fourth, maybe Menafiorat and stuff like that. But I would say Shevchenko beats all of them. Strawweight. The current champion is Zhang Wei Li. How does she fight Rose Namajunas? She lost to her twice. I don't think anything changes in the third fight. If it's prime Rose, not the version of Rose we see now. Wei Li versus Joanna. We saw that fight. Wei Li wins. Wei Li versus Andrade. We saw that as well. Carla Esparza. We saw that fight as well. It is crazy. The strawweights, all the greats have fought each other. That's because the division is very new. So that's what I think about the current champions versus the all-time greats of their divisions. Some would win, some would lose, some would be dominant, some wouldn't. And leave in the comments below, what do you guys think? Which champions would prevail against the all-time greats? And I'll see you guys in the next video.